Do you have more intentions of exercise or starting a new exercise regime in the new year? If your New Year's resolution is that you want to start doing more and you just want to get to the gym 2 to 3 times a week, or you want to start running 2 to 3 times per week, and that is about as much thought as you've given it for your New Year's resolution, then I hate to say it, you're probably not going to last much beyond the end of January into February. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about why it's so important to have a plan in place before you get to New Year's, and why now is the perfect time, and a kind of couple of ideas that you might want to take away and think about. And then I'm going to answer the rest of the questions that have come in advance of this monthly live Q&A episode. So for anyone who hasn't heard or seen me before, my name is Chris Tiley, and I'm a physio with a particular interest in introducing older adults to strength training. On the first Wednesday of every month at midday, I run these live Q&A sessions. So it is your chance to ask me any questions that you might have about the beginner stages of strength training. So whether that's just getting started or whether you've done a little bit but you don't really know how to progress, just any questions relating to that, then please do use this opportunity. So if you are watching this live, you can use the chat feature and I will see them as they come up. Now, if it's a question I feel I can answer straight away, then I'll add that to the list and we'll answer it towards the end. If it's one that I think I need a little bit more time and research to give you the best answer possible, then I'll acknowledge the question and then we'll come back to that in next month's Q&A. So next month it will be Wednesday the 7th of January at midday. Equally, if you're watching this after this is finished, so this is on Wednesday the 3rd of December at midday at the moment, but if you're watching this later on or another day and you have a question, you can still leave it in the comments and I will check it and come back to it next month, again on the 7th of January. If you're listening to the audio podcast, then clearly this isn't live. But if you do have any questions, then again, either jump over to YouTube, leave a comment there, or you can send me an email. So it's chris@nevertooldtolift.com. So that again is chris@nevertooldtolift.com. So back to New Year's resolutions. So the idea here is we want to make sure that you know in advance what you're going to do, because I see too many people that just turn up to the gym in that first week of January and they just kind of pick a couple of machines and have a couple of ideas of exercises in mind, and they just do them on that day. And then they come in the next day, but the machines they wanted to use are now not available. So they then have to do something else. And then on the next day, they mix it up again. And there's no real clear plan in place. There's no continuity from one workout to the next. And they don't have any idea about even what the next workout is going to be, let alone the one that in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month's time. Strength training isn't going to work. We're not going to get any stronger if you haven't really thought about the bigger picture and how you're going to progress as you get going. So this kind of tied quite nicely in with the first question that came in. And that was, I get overwhelmed by all the conflicting advice online. What are the 3 most important things to focus on when starting? And the reason I thought this was a nice segue into this was because these are the 3 things you want to think about before you turn up to that first gym session. And again, given it's the start of December, you've now got a month to think about this and put a plan in place before you start. Or even better, you can even start a few weeks early and get on top of it before everyone else does. But if we look at those 3 things that I think are the most important that I would focus on, is the first one is going to be goal planning. Second one is make sure you know the exercises that you're going to be working on, and that's going to be your plan of exercises for the next 3 months. And then we need to know how to progress, because again, a lot of people don't know this, particularly when it relates to strength training, and they don't have that plan in place and they never progress enough to actually build strength. So if we go back to goal planning, is we want to make sure that we have a real reason for doing the strength training. So if your goal was, I just want to feel stronger, I want to feel healthier, and that's about it, again, you'll be fine in the initial stages and the initial weeks because you'll have a bit of short-term enthusiasm, and that's enough to get you in the gym and keep you going through these workouts that you're trying to do. But as that short-term enthusiasm wanes, those vague goals aren't going to be enough to keep you motivated to keep going in. So we want to get a little bit more detailed and granular on what would being stronger mean for you. What would it allow you to do? How do you feel being able to do the more activities with the increased strength that you've got? And easier to go through a couple of examples that have come from the podcast and interviews that we've done. And the first one comes from the episode with Kim in episode 10. She said the main driver for her to start strength training was the fact that she'd been on a boating holiday in Greece, and she was kind of shocked at and surprised about how difficult she found climbing up the ladder out of the water back into the boat. And one, she hated the fact that physically she wasn't able to do something that she'd been able to do just the year before. But more so, it was the embarrassment, because she found that she was holding up everyone behind her, and she felt really self-conscious about that. And it kind of put a bit of a downer on the holiday. She loved the holiday, but she hated the way she felt in that moment. And she really wanted to go again next year, but really was not looking forward to the fact that the same thing might happen. So her goal was, I'm going to start doing some weight training because I want to be stronger. I want to be able to easily pull myself out of that boat, out of the water into the boat. And that was a driver. So again, when her short-term enthusiasm waned, she had the days where her motivation was naturally lower. Instead of talking herself out of it and just not going, she remembered why it was that she wanted to do it. And that avoiding feeling embarrassed was a strong enough driver for her to keep going on the days where she didn't really feel like it. Another example, we could use Steve from episode 20. He lives in Spain, but his family live back in the UK, and he has a new grandchild. And he knew that in 3 months' time, he was going back for the first time to see his grandchild. And he wanted to be able to fly with just his cabin bag. He didn't want to have a whole bag. So the cabin bag limit was about 10 kilograms. So he wanted to know that with ease, he could maneuver and carry around this smaller bag. He wanted to be able to get it, lift it up into the overhead locker above where I was sitting. And he knew that he would probably struggle with that as it was. So he wanted to be able to practice that and have the strength to do that. But then more importantly, once he got home or back to the UK, he wanted to know that he can get on and off the floor with ease, be able to do it without using the hands, to be able to hold his grandson whilst being able to get up from the floor and not have to rely on pushing on things. And again, it's all these things that every time he thought about not going, it was that relationship with his grandson that was the thing that really pushed him to want to get in the gym. So that's what I want you to think about, is what is it going to be for you that really makes you think that it's going to drive you on those days where you don't have much motivation. So that's the goal planning, and that's a step that most people skip, don't really think about it. And then I want to come on to the exercises that we're going to start to use. So I talked about the example earlier of people kind of doing 4 or 5 exercises in one workout and then mixing it up and doing different ones on another day and then different ones on another day, and there's no continuity to it. What I tend to suggest is that you have 2 alternating workouts of about 4 exercises, maybe 5 exercises. And these are then going to be your 2 alternating workouts for the next 12 weeks, 3 months minimum. Again, we're not mixing it up. You get to work at the intensity where we're gradually building. I'll come on to that in the next step with the progressions. But they're your focus. You just want to know how to improve with those 2 sets of 4 exercises. Now, in terms of exercise selection, this is where it can be really dangerous, because there's so many options of exercises, so many different variations of each type of exercise, and it becomes a bit like paralysis by analysis. Now, there is no wrong or right answer to exercise choice. It's just making a decision and sticking with it. Clearly, if there's pain or discomfort, we need to adapt around that. But other than that, I'm not too worried about which exercises you pick. Now, I tend to focus on the functional movement patterns because they use multiple muscle groups at the same time to replicate a movement that we might do on a day-to-day basis. So it makes it a bit easier to kind of see how doing this exercise in the gym is going to benefit me outside the gym. But sometimes people feel a bit daunted by these type of exercises. So what I mean by functional movement pattern is something like a squat, some kind of hip hinge. It's a bit like a deadlift, and I'm going to talk about more of those in another question. Then we've got lunges, we've got push exercises, we've got pull exercises, we've got trunk rotations or rotation of the body, and then carrying a weight whilst walking. So the kind of gait or carry exercises. I've got a nice video that I'm going to link to below in the comments or also in the video description or on the podcast show notes page of a bit more of a breakdown of these functional movement patterns. But they're just one idea. If you like the idea of using fixed machines in the gym, they're fantastic too. People feel a lot safer on those. If you just want to do exercises that just utilize one muscle group at a time, maybe like a bicep curl, or if you're on the knee extension machine, just doing the knee extension, again, fantastic for the moment. Let's get started with whichever exercises you feel happy with, familiar with, and let's get going with those. We can always, after we've been doing it for a few months, then start to mix things up again. But for the moment, 2 alternating workouts of 4 to 5 exercises per workout. So you just need to pick 8 to 10 exercises and know that they're going to be your focus for the next 3 months. Then we're going to work on the third step, which is how to progress. So with starting to build strength, the focus we need, or the intensity we need to work at when we're doing our exercises that we've picked, is to try and push those muscles close to the point of muscular fatigue. So that is where the last repetition you're aiming for is almost the last one you could have managed. Because if you could have quite easily kind of moved that weight around and it didn't feel particularly hard, and when you finish, say, your 10 or 15 repetitions, you could have quite happily done another 5 to 10 repetitions straight off the bat without having stopped or rested, then whilst no exercise is a waste of time, you're not building strength. And a lot of people, most people, it's strength that we're losing, and it's strength that we need to build to do the things we want to. So we do need to push the muscular fatigue. A lot of people actually get this right straight away. They do find how to do that. But the mistake they then tend to make is once they found something that was challenging and now feels easy, it now feels safe. And what they tend to do is just stick with the same exercises with the same weight and never progress again. Or they progress a lot later than they should have done. And the problem with strength training is once it starts to feel easy, it's no longer strength training. So we do need to make it harder. That's why we increase the weight we're using, or increase the resistance we're using. So we want to make sure we try and every time we up that weight when it feels easier. And then when it feels easy again, we up the weight again. And if we can, we're trying to get our number of repetitions it takes us to reach that muscular fatigue point. It might initially be somewhere between 12 and 15 repetitions. If we can increase the weight enough to bring that down to maybe 5 to 8 repetitions, you're going to get a lot more strength. But that's getting a little bit too complicated for this question. So it's, in terms of the 3 things I focus on, is come up with some clear granular goals that you're going to work towards. Pick 8 to 10 exercises you're going to work on each week, split over 2 workouts, and then find the weight that you're going to use to push those muscles to fatigue within 3 sets of doing those exercises. And each time you feel that that's getting easier and it's no longer that challenging, we want to up the weight a little bit more. And that kind of answers this question, but it kind of goes back to that original point of New Year's resolutions, is if you can get an idea of all 3 of those points now in December before you get started, you have a much higher chance of sticking to your workout program. And it just made me feel, if there's a research paper out there, and I can't remember all the exact figures off the top of my head, but if they found that people who wrote their goals down, they did significantly better, or more people kept to their goal and achieved their goal than people who didn't write it down. So that's another kind of trick as well, is if you are writing it down, don't just have a vague thought in your head of it, is write down that detailed granular goal that you're going to work towards. Now, if you do want to kind of go through that, but you feel like you need a bit more help, then I have a completely free ebook that you can work through. It's going to guide you through the whole of the goal planning process, the theory of pushing to muscular fatigue. It's going to help you pick your exercise. It's going to go through all those movement patterns, and it's even going to break it down into different variations of exercises within those movement patterns. And it gives you a template to put those in, that is those 2 alternating workouts. So again, that is completely free. So you can go to nevertooltolift.com/ebook and find that there. But again, I'll put that in the description below, and I'll put that in the podcast show notes page. The other option that some people might be interested in is I've also got a online course. Let's bring that up here. That again goes through all the same theory, but it's, rather than reading it, it's all by videos, little bite-sized chunks. But the more important thing is you get weekly access to me via weekly group Zoom calls, to where I can help you through any sticking points. You can ask me any questions that you have. You can get support from the rest of the group and accountability. And it becomes a bit more of a community going through the same process at the same time, and you can get their support from the people who may be a couple of months ahead of you. So again, if you're interested in that, it's nevertooltolift.com/course. Just hide that for you there. So before I go on to the next one, just a reminder for anyone who is watching live, then now is a chance to use a chat feature, and you can ask me any questions you're going through or you want me to answer. And again, if you're watching us afterwards in the recording, then please do use the comments below. Another small favour is, if you are finding any value from any of these episodes or any of the questions I'm answering, then rather than me asking for likes or subscribers, what I really like is if you just shared this episode, or any future episode where you feel like someone would benefit from hearing that answer, or you know someone who might have a question for me, then do share the episode using the share feature on YouTube. And the more people we can help inspire get started, the better. But we'll go into the next question. So it's a bit of a longer email, this, but I'll kind of just pick out the main points. So the person says, the advice I need is, I've been seen by orthopedics and now on the waiting list for a hip replacement. I go to the gym, and then brackets, thank you for giving me the confidence to actually get through the door, close brackets, twice a week for weighted circuits and once a week for my own routine. I'm finding squats or anything to do with the right hip more difficult. So it's achy rather than painful, but suffers throughout the evening. Never tend to do a deep squat and tend to use a Smith machine. Leg extension machines are fine, as are the leg press. Am I better to just use machines for my legs and hips because my form is better? Any advice is gratefully received. So this is quite a nice question, because it's basically, this is for anyone who has arthritic joints. So this is obviously about the hip. It could be equally about the knee. And you might be at the point where you've tried conservative management, you've tried some strengthening, had physio, nothing seems to be helping, and you're now kind of resigned to the idea that you're going to have the replacement, and you're on the list and just waiting for that, however long that wait might be. There are people that think, well, at this point, I'm going to have the replacement. I'm just going to stop what I'm doing because I don't like being in discomfort, and I'll just get started at trying to build some strength and rehab it after it's done. And whilst I kind of understand that mindset to a certain degree, it's far better to try and maintain as much muscle as we can prior to having the surgery. So this person's goal here is, if we can build a bit more strength on top of what she's already got, fantastic. If that's not possible because the pain gets in the way, then let's maintain as much as we can. So with that in mind, I'm not too worried about what the exercises might be. We just need to pick exercises that we can actually do. We can get to muscular fatigue to build the strength that we're trying to build. So with this person, deep squats cause her to suffer for the rest of the evening. So if every time she does them, she's constantly suffering the rest of the evening, then that's going to put her off wanting to do it. You're not going to want to do it if you know it's going to be more than just a few minutes of pain, if you're then in pain for several hours, and you're going to give up with it. So let's not focus too much on the deep squats. If she can do shallow squats and she can do those with a significant amount of weight and not have the same reaction, then you still do get a good amount of strength from that. So for a lot of people, they do suggest just the big adaptation is let's just do a shallower depth of the movement or exercise you're trying to do. And as you build a bit of strength, you often find you can start to explore deeper depths. But for this person who's waiting for the hip replacement, stick to shallow squats if we can and add some weight if you can. If not, and you said the leg press feels pretty good, let's try the leg press and continue with that, because again, a lot of people feel much safer on a leg press because you're seated, you're not going to suddenly lose balance or fall, and you're not going to get stuck at the bottom of the movement because you can kind of just lock the leg press machine in place and just take your legs away. Leg press can be fantastic for this. Again, we want to build strength in all the legs. If we've got a hip and a knee joint that we're trying to work around, so if we can build strength in the quads through the knee extension and they're not a problem, then by all means do the knee extensions. Hamstring curls are another great one you probably want to include. And again, that could be a seated hamstring curl, that could be a prone hamstring curl where you're laying on your front. I would definitely do those. And again, the aim is we want to try and push the muscular fatigue. Calf raises are often really good to add in as well. And then you can start to do things around the back and the core. So things like trunk rotations, again, they shouldn't really cause much of a problem to the hip there. So again, it comes back to that picking a routine of exercises of 4 to 5 exercises in maybe 2 alternating workouts. We've got 8 to 10 exercises. And all we're doing is avoiding the ones that cause a reaction. So for this person, their main question was, should I be focused on the squats or maybe just use machines instead? It's like, if you can find a way of doing the squat without pain and keeping it shallow, then yes, keep them in. But I wouldn't put too much pressure on it now whilst we're just trying to maintain. I would bring them back in afterwards. So hopefully that helps. And if anyone else has got a sort of similar or related question and you've got any follow-up questions from that, then please do use the chat feature to let me know. And that just leaves me with one more question that came in ahead of this. So we'll go on to that one. So this is, everyone says deadlifts are essential, but they terrify me. Is there a safer alternative that works the same muscles? So there's a couple of points that I wanted to kind of bring in with this question. And the first one is kind of tackling that idea and the common fear that people have around deadlifts. So for me, I agree. I think deadlifts are fantastic. I think they're one of the major movement patterns. So I talked about those 7 functional movement patterns. And if I had to pick only 4 of those movement patterns, deadlifts would be included in there, or at least the hip hinge movement pattern. And that's going to help us come up with some alternatives to deadlifts for people who don't like them. But if you can add in a squat, a hip hinge, a push and a pull, you've got a great base of a program there. But a lot of people fear deadlifts. And I do understand, because if anyone's come to see me in the physio clinic and they've had a negative experience with any exercise in terms of they've suffered pain from having done it, the most common culprit tends to be the deadlift. Now, it's not necessarily the deadlift's fault. It's often trying to do too much too quickly. And it's not always about trying to do too much weight too quickly. Sometimes it's going straight from the floor with a deadlift, and so it's too much depth effectively too quickly. And similar back to the last question of deep squats, it might not be the squat that's the issue, it's the deeper part of the squat that at this particular point in time is the issue. So again, for someone who's just getting started with deadlifts, I don't tend to focus on right from the floor. I tend to start from a shallower position. So again, that's where I'd start with this question is, rather than avoid deadlifts and trying to do something completely different, can we try and make the deadlift less scary and less likely to cause a reaction that they might have around their back, which is the common fear and the common location of pain? So ways of reducing the depth of a deadlift, if we start from the thing that we're lifting, so whether it is straight in with a bar, again, for most people, if they're new to it, I don't tend to use a bar because it's a bit more daunting, a bit scary to start with. So I tend to focus maybe on a kettlebell or a couple of dumbbells. But what you could do, and I normally do, is put a kettlebell on a sort of Reebok step, one of the exercise steps. And because the handle sits above the kettlebell, which is then already raised, you're kind of getting to the point where the handle is about level with your knees. And that way you're only having to lean forward a little bit in order to hold the weight, and then to extend the hips to come back up, and then flex at the hips to go back down into that Romanian deadlift type action. And it's Romanian deadlift is generally where I start with people. If I'm using the bar, what we can do is set the hooks up on a squat rack at a level that's about level with the knees, or maybe slightly higher. And you can pick the bar up from that height rather than picking up from the floor to get up to the first rep. Because again, sometimes it's that getting up into the right position that then causes people to twinge their back. They didn't even intend to do deadlifts. They want to just pick up the bar up to start. So actually racking the bar up from a higher position allows you to maintain that shallower depth all the way through. There are things called rack pulls, which is similar to that, where instead of just the normal sort of J hooks you have where you rest the bar on before you get started, they extend out from the squat rack. So you're just pulling it up from that. So you rest the bar on those safety bars, and then you just pull the bar up until you're fully extended, and then you just lower it back and let it rest down again. And then you repeat that for how many repetitions. So we call those rack pulls if you're sort of not sure and you want to visualize it. So you can search for that online. So rack pull. And then the other one I talked about is RDL, which is short for Romanian deadlift. So again, that's another thing to look at. But for anyone who is really doesn't like the idea of deadlifts or anything that looks like a deadlift, then the other less scary version of a hip hinge is the bridge exercise. So that's where you lay on your back with your knees bent to roughly 90 degrees and your feet are flat on the floor. And then you're going to push through your heels to lift your hips up into the air. So the hips have started in a flex position until the point they're up in the air where you're now in an extended hip position. So we're hinging at the hips and extending the hips, which is the same as what we're doing on a deadlift or a Romanian deadlift. This is less scary because you don't need your full body weight going through it at the time. And then we can add some resistance in. And what I tend to do is hold a resistance band across my waist and pin the ends down on the floor. So as I lift up, my hands stay on the floor and the resistance band's tensions, the higher my hips get. And that creates tension you're working against. You can even rest a weight on your hips, and that could be a bar, and then lift up again. And that's a nice way, and it's quite a shallow depth to start with, but it's a nice way of introducing the hip hinge. But you can also do what's called a hip thruster, which again I'll try and describe, but if you need to look it up, you can search that on YouTube. So hip thruster, and you're just resting your back on a box or a bench, or at home you could use a sofa or a bed, and you're kind of your shoulders are supported, and everything up to about the bra strap level on your back is supported by the bench or the box, and your hips are suspended in the air initially, and then your sort of shins come down vertically. And then what you're going to do is lower your hips down towards the floor. But normally where in a bridge you'd stop because you hit the floor, this is going to allow you to sink even deeper past that point. So you're getting a much deeper movement. And again, you can hold the weight with a bar on there, or you can use other forms of weight. But it allows you to push up and extend the hips with some resistance. So again, it's that same hip hinge motion with resistance where we can start to find fatigue. But people find this a lot less scary than a deadlift a lot of the time. So that could be another option. Other forms of hip hinge, a kettlebell swing tends to be a bit like a hip hinge. It tends to be needed to be done faster. So you do get some power in there. So we call it's the speed at which you can access your strength. But again, if you're new, you can start off a little bit slower, but some people get on with them well. Some people find that because it's a quicker motion and they haven't got the confidence doing a deadlift normally, they find that actually that then can twinge the back as well. So some people, that's something you need to be a bit cautious about if you've never done it before, or especially start light before you build the weight. But I think they're the main ones that I'd work on there. But again, anyone's got any follow-up questions about that, then please don't hesitate to use the comments feature below to let me know. So that is all the questions I had prepared. If you do have any other questions, if you're watching this live, then please, this is your last opportunity to use the chat feature to let me know. And then just a quick reminder of that free ebook. So it's nevertooldtolift.com/ebook, and that's just going to guide you through creating your first strength training program with everything we talked about in mind, of goal setting, exercise selection, how to progress, putting it all together into a template, and then working on that for sort of 12 weeks. If you're interested in the course, then again, that's nevertooldtolift.com/course, and that kind of goes through the same process, but you're going to get access to me via weekly calls, and you get to be part of a bit more of a community going through the same thing at the same time. So do take a look at that if you're interested. And then a reminder that the next monthly Q&A session is going to be Wednesday the 7th of January at midday, and that's UK time. So any questions before then, either email me, it's chris@nevertooldtolift.com, or leave it in the comments below, and I will come back to those questions ready for that next monthly Q&A session. But for now, we've got another episode next week, so please do make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss on being notified when that comes out. But yeah, I hope you have a great week and enjoy your first week of December.